show. Scott, great to see both of you. We were going to be joined by Toby, aka Batflip Crazy, but there was some timing issues there, so he wasn't going to be able to make it if you were looking for him. But we've still got Scott and Joe. Going to get plenty of great info. We got a battle per position that we're going to go through, and because we have 6 different setups here, we can spend about 10 minutes per, which is actually quite a bit of time. So we can dive in. If we got to pick it up at any point, I'll let you all know. But take your time, give your thoughts here. Let's start and go around the horn. Let's start at catcher. We've got a second-tier catcher group here, right after the top dogs, of really interesting guys, 3 of whom are established. I don't want to say old. One of them is kind of old, but the other 3 are, or 2 of the other 3 are veterans. And then there's the big riser that goes by the nickname Big Dumper. And in this ADP of 138 through 145, that's overall pick. And this is using NFBC's Draft Champions since the new year. So that's 30 drafts. Pretty good data set here. I feel like we can definitely use this. If you just go to the NFBC ADP, you do Draft Champions from the drop down and then change the dates to January 1st through today, 128, which is when this is being recorded if you're watching it on YouTube. And you get Sal Perez over at pick 138, Cal Raleigh at 140, Wilson Contreras at 141. Brother William Contreras is already gone at pick 80, by the way, which is kind of interesting. I'm not sure they should be that far apart, but that's maybe a tack on discussion. And then Sean Murphy, Mr. Second Half Fader, that has people worried and has him all the way down at 145. Joe, let me start with you here. You can pick any of the 4. Who's your absolute favorite at the price point right now?
I think of all the debates we're going to do today, this one's the most clear cut for me. It's Wilson Contreras. He's the guy that I have the most shares of so far of this group. I think out of my 6 drafts, I have him in 3 so far. And I think it's just the price point is so reasonable for somebody that is going to give you a well-rounded stat line from a catcher. You're going to get decent batting average and some steals to go along with 20 home runs. He's in a good lineup. There was a lot of shenanigans last year in St. Louis where there was talk of putting him in the outfield and he struggled, and he still ended up doing essentially what he always does. If you look at the stat line last year versus previous years, it was pretty much exactly the same for what we've come to love from Wilson Contreras. And he got a little bit of a boost in the batting average, batting 264 as opposed to usually in the 240. So he's definitely my guy there. I have some concerns about Perez getting older and the lineup around him is not great. Sean Murphy really faded down the stretch, and Travis d'Arnaud being healthy, we saw at the beginning of last year, d'Arnaud took away some playing time from Murphy. Cal Raleigh, I think, is the closest one for me, but now there's also Mitch Garver in town as well. And Cal Raleigh played 145 games last year. I don't know if he's going to be able to meet that same threshold with Garver. So I have a lot more concern with the other 3 names. With Contreras, I think with the wheels up and he's ready to take off here in year 2 in St. Louis.
Well, while I share your intrigue with Wilson Contreras, I'm not as concerned about Garver. I think they are really going to make sure that he's DH, maybe a little bit of first base here and there. Ty France, gets hit by 50 pitches a year, so he might miss a knick-knack game here and there. And then on the Sean Murphy piece, you're right. It was a really tough finish, but it really was that 1 month of September, 451 OPS, that tanked the entire second half after a 999 OPS in the first half. And so then you see this 999 versus 584 OPS split by half. I look at it more and I see an 899 OPS through August and then a meltdown September when he became a part-time player because they didn't have to push him because they were the Braves. They were coasting into the playoffs. And it's really only 55 plate appearances there. So I agree with your choice, just a little not as locked in on the reasoning with somebody like a Murphy. But I love Wilson Contreras. I kind of hinted at Brother William going at pick 80 being a little weird to me, not against William, but more pro Wilson. And if I'm going to go with a Contreras, just give me the 60 pick discount. Scott, who's your favorite here of this little quartet of catchers?
So I thought it's really, I agree with Joe in that it's between Cal Raleigh and Wilson Contreras for me. Sal Perez, I'm just really worried the bottom's going to fall out. It's the skill set, right? He's a pure bats a ball kind of guy. He's not trying to walk. He's not trying to make good decisions. He's just trying to hit the ball. That gets harder to do the older you get because you just lose some bat speed. I actually ended up on Cal Raleigh, and it's mostly because I play a lot of one catcher leagues, like 12 teams, sometimes 15, but it's one catcher leagues, and power is always hard for me to get to. Like, power is just so important. Cal Raleigh, he's the catcher that, he's a 30 home run guy, maybe a little short, like 27, something like that. But Cal Raleigh's got all that power. I was a little worried because when I went through our pitcher list rolling charts, I thought he was a guy like, oh, he must make good decisions. A lot of power hitters like this are guys who have really good decision making and really poor contact skills, but when they make contact, they send it a long way. And Cal Rayleigh's really erratic in decision making. But because the ceiling there, especially when I'm talking like 12-team leagues, I want to chase the ceiling. And Wilson's like a pure floor guy for me, right? Like I know what the floor is, and it's not that far off from the ceiling, right? Like Wilson Contreras in a good year is going to give like 20 home runs and 5 steals, and like in a bad year is going to give you like 19 home runs and 4 steals, right? Like it's such a tight band that I get why in like a draft champions format, a 2-catcher format, you need that first catcher to have that kind of floor, right? You need that. Like, I know exactly what I'm getting. But in the 12-team context where I can do a lot more streaming, I can sort of play around a little bit if something doesn't quite work out. I think I really like a guy like Cal Rayleigh who can really give me a lot of extra power, up to 10 more home runs. That's a big deal, especially at catcher where it's not easy to stream power at catching without completely sacrificing all your stats. So that's where it was for me. And Sean Murphy, the biggest thing with him is I was doing rankings throughout last season. It just bugged me how much Atlanta was willing to sit Sean Murphy.
Yeah.
Right? Like they just got like, they were just completely willing. They had absolutely, these other guys can play DH for their teams if they need to, right? Or like need to be on the field. Atlanta just really showed they don't need Sean Murphy to be on the field.
No,
right?
They really didn't.
They got a great deal. And
they still will this year, though. Like they will, though. And I don't want to get too influenced by that, especially with Travis d'Arnaud being A, 35 and B, not very good last year. So I do hope that doesn't happen again. I am willing to take the gamble. I think it's actually too big of a discount on Sean Murphy in light of that playing time situation last year at pick 145. But all your other points are well taken. And you bring up one catcher leagues. If you were in a one catcher league of any size, even as big as 15, even as big as your 20 teamers, catcher is deep. Justin and I have been hitting on that on the podcast. Catcher is remarkably deep. I think it's deep in 2-catcher formats. Of course, it's deep in 1-catcher formats. You can do so many different things there. I still like a lot of the studs, but if I don't get one, I've got no problem just taking what's left for me, like a Danny Jansen or something in a deeper 1-catcher league or something like that, or pairing the 2 Toronto guys and just going Jansen Kirk in a 2-catcher league and just going late. I think catcher's very deep this year. And even this little quartet that we've got here kind of shows that. Joe, any final thoughts before we move over to first base?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. The d'Arnaud thing, I just remember at the beginning of last year, and it shocked kind of all of us that they were until he got hurt, he was getting at least half of the playing time, and I just wonder if that's what we're going to see again to start out this year. I take your points. He's getting older. He's not that great. I just think they're still going to use him more than we'd probably like. But the price of Murphy, again, to your point, is low enough that you can take that chance and not get hurt by really anybody in this range. If there's anybody that I wouldn't want, it's Perez, but the other 3, I'm very much interested in taking all of them.
Yeah, I've been anti-Perez for years, and I guess I don't want to say it's burning me in that, like, I lost the league because I didn't get him, but he does just kind of keep on ticking. And I know, like, calling somebody an Energizer Bunny or a Timex watch is a very dated reference that makes me super old, but like, he does keep kind of churning out the quality seasons, with your 20-something bombs and your 250 average. Of course, he spiked that huge 2021, which I don't know why anybody bought him the year after that at the exorbitant price point, but that was their choice, not mine. Let's move over to first base because we've had some interesting discussion about a few of these guys. In fact, I just saw in the chat when they were talking about Tristan Casas in the last panel, somebody asked Tristan Casas or Spencer Torkelson. So we've got the last year's breakout 1Bs here. I'm going to start with Scott. Casas at 112, Spencer Steer with multi-eligibility, which could be a factor for you, so feel free to bring that up. You're not limited to him at first base here at pick 117. And then our boy in Detroit, Spencer Torkelson, had his breakout, big second half surge at pick 124. So Scott, who is your breakout from last year at first base that you're believing in this year with the elevated price point?
Yeah, and I'll admit to being a little drunk on Detroit sports right now. Right?
Absolutely.
Like, love looking at these young Tigers players. We got our Lions in the playoffs. Like, our curling leagues never had to deal with this. We had to move leagues around because the Lions were playing in January on Sunday night.
I can't believe it. I can't believe that football's still relevant to me in anything more than a fantasy capacity right now.
It's amazing, but I am picking Spencer Torkelson here. I talked about this a little bit in my rolling chart presentation, but what we've seen with Torkelson ever since he's come into the league, look, it started bad. I know that, but he has consistently gone upwards in terms of power. He's just finding more and more power entirely as he goes. He's adding extra bases. It's not always home runs. Comerica's got huge doubles alleys. It's hard to always get the home runs. But even in a park like Comerica, Torkelson's the one out of this group that can hit 40 home runs, right? Casas has power, right? But he doesn't try to make that much contact. He's someone who mostly just relies on waiting, find my one pitch, try to send it. But Spencer Torkelson is a guy who I think can hit 40 home runs. He actually was on that pace for his last 102 games last season. And yeah, the batting average might hurt a little bit because he does hit a lot of balls in the air, but that's fine. That's what I want him to do anyway. I want Spencer Torkelson hitting balls in the air. I want him to get him out of the park. I think that lineup in Detroit is getting better, right? I think those core pieces are there, especially if like Riley Green's healthy for a full season. They've got some pieces they can really put together. And so I'm going to go with Torque. Look, I know this, get a little ding on the batting average, but I think the counting stats can be better. I think the home runs can be better. And I know, I don't think Tristan Casas is going to sit very often, but Spencer Torkelson's never sitting when he's healthy, right? There's absolutely no risk there. So I'm going Torque. I want the 40 home runs. I want the almost Pete Alonso light. Like I don't take that comparison too far, but he's the guy that can hit that 40 home runs plus. This is the guy. I love Torque. I think he's got huge skills. He's one of the best college hitters we've seen in a long time. I'm all in on Spencer Torkelson.
Yeah, I think some people forget maybe that he was a 1-1, and after 404 plate appearances of his rookie year, another thing Justin and I talk a lot about on the pod is like just the disregard for players after one bad year, not even a full year. 404 plate appearances isn't even a full year, and then he failed, he's out, and the price plummets, and we see that again with some guys who didn't perform last year. Scott, before we jump over to other positions, since it is Tigers and we are feeling ourselves as Detroit sports fans here a little bit, the Colt Keith signing, what's your quick take there, even though we're talking first base?
I love this move, one, because the Tigers desperately need some infielders, right? It's something they've really needed. Look, these kinds of deals where you're buying out years of arbitration. Look, Colt Keith, if he's the type of player we think he is and doesn't do this deal, he could make an extra 50 or 60 million, but not if he struggles right out the gate. Right. Really, both sides are taking a gamble here. I really like these deals, even though if the player ends up being good, like Acuna, they look super club friendly, but it's look, you don't know if you're going to get hurt. As a person, I'm taking the guaranteed money every time.
Always.
And arbitration's terrible. It's just your team telling you why you suck.
Exactly. And there's plenty of misses on them, and they don't kill the team either. So as a Tigers fan, I love this. Even if he completely was a stone cold flop, they're never using the Colt Keith contract as a reason they can't go out and do moves, right? You don't see Philly saying, well, we got that Kingery deal we really got to pay off, so we can't go get anybody. This is a no-brainer for the team. And frankly, I think it's a no-brainer for the player. Obviously, the biggest one that really stands out, I still don't understand what Ozzy Albies' agent was doing, because even for a team-friendly deal, that one is criminal. But we don't have to get into that. Joe, let's talk first base here. Again, it's Casas at 112, Spencer Steer at 117, and Spencer Torkelson at 124. Scott took Torque. Where you at on these three here?
I've honestly kind of changed my tune a little bit. I think they're really close. All three of them are incredibly close, but I'm kind of leaning more towards Spencer Steer at this point, in all honesty. I think you get the multi-position eligibility. You get the batting average safety that you don't have as much with the other two. You're getting a good chunk of stolen bases that you're not getting with the other two. A great ballpark. I know there is worry about how many mouths to feed there are in Cincinnati, but that was kind of a concern last year, and he played 156 games. So he's somebody that they've shown they are going to get into the lineup. His defense isn't great at any position, but the fact that he can get in at first, third, left, second, right, he can play everywhere. I'm not really concerned about him playing. I think you're still going to see 140, 145 games at least from him. So I think that he's the most well-rounded pick here. I think Casas and Torkelson, I have one share of each of them so far, and I'll probably take some more. But I just think there is some concern there, considering the high price, that you're not getting any stolen bases. You're not getting as much of a secure batting average. I think I'm at Spencer Steer at this point, but I think all three are great picks in this range, really.
Yeah, if I wasn't hosting and making my picks more here, I would try to cheat and be multiples, because I can really see myself taking any two of these three in a draft, especially because Steer can move around. So you can take Torque or Casas, put them at first corner, and then you can still move Steer around at third and outfield there with the triple eligibility, which again, he may add to even when the season's going, because injuries could crop up, things could change. I don't really see them sitting him too much unless he falls on his face, which I also don't see. I quite like Spencer Steer. Let's move over to the Keystone here. Talk some power speed Keystones. going around in between pick 100 and 133. So we do have a bigger price discrepancy between high and low here, which might be the key driver for you. But it's Gleyber Torres at pick 90, Bryson Stott at 103, Andres Jimenez at 107, and Zach Geloff at 133. Scott, let's start with you again on this one. Where do you stand with these four here? They bring power, they bring some speed. A couple of them have some multi-positional eligibility. Any one of them jump out as like, that's a guy I really love.
Man, this was tough because I kept like looking at all the reasons I wouldn't want one of them. It was very negative for me at the start, but I ended up deciding on Bryson Stott. And it was more of like for me, it was like a matter of elimination. Number one, Stott's got as much or more speed than any of these guys. He just come off a 30 stolen base season. I think he can do that again. He is a decent base stealer. Torres, he can't get to that number. Jimenez, I still have no idea how good Andres Jimenez is, right? Like, I don't think he's good. I don't think he's as good as he was in 2022, but I have no idea what that actually, like, after that, I'm like, dude, I don't know. He slaps the ball around a lot, but sometimes he does it terribly. And sometimes he hits some line drives and good things happen. So, and then with Zach Geloff, man, he concerns me because number one, I don't love guys who struggle with in zone contact, right? Like, you got to be able to hit strikes you swing at. Right. Mm-hmm. It's a big deal to me. And Geloff really struggles with that at times, especially because that, it's been written up a lot. That softball swing of his, right? Like, It's super flat. It's super weird. And he's in Oakland, which is like, it matters that you're in Oakland. There's not a lot of good things happening out there. So I took Stott. I think he's on, he's probably on the most consistent offense here. Like, you might argue that like the Yankees could have a better offense, but I think Stott's on the most consistent offense here. He's definitely in the bank for steals. The 15 home runs is probably all he's got there, but it also comes with batting average. I like the well-roundedness. I like the safety. That's kind of where I ended up here.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. And, the worries with Geloff, and he's going to pick 133, which is the cheapest of this group, but that's such a high pick. He went 14-14 in 69 games. And, he probably saved some people's seasons down the stretch. I don't think you can come anywhere near extrapolating with that. Obviously, you should never do that, like take a sample and just double it or whatever, because he did have 300 plate appearances, so you can do the easy double. Oh, he's a 28 guy. I'm not even sure you can 0.75 it. Like, that was such a great fluky run there that at pick 133, I'm going nowhere near Geloff, even though he was on my team. He did help a couple of my teams down the stretch. I'm not letting that overweight my opinion for him going into this next year, because Oakland, they're just so bad. The runs ribbies are going to put him so far behind for a top 150 pick. Joe, where do you stand on these four here? Do you like Stott as well, or are you going elsewhere?
I would say it's between Stott and Torres, and it gets to your build at that point of the draft. If you need a little bit more, I think they're very close, and it's just the stolen base and the home runs are kind of flipped. Where with Gleyber, it's probably like 25 and 10. With Stott, it's probably like 10 and 25. If you need a little bit more power at that point of the draft, then I'm taking Gleyber. If you're a little bit short on speed, then I would take Bryson Stott. I think that they're super, super close, though, in terms of the overall value. If you want to put a dollar value onto it, I think they're going to be within a few cents of each other at the end of the year. But it would definitely be those two. Jimenez, inconsistent. I think I'm just, again, like you guys, not really sure what he is. And then Geloff, you're paying a lot for a guy who's in a terrible ballpark and a terrible lineup, who we don't really know exactly what he is yet. So it's definitely between Stott and Torres for me.
Yeah, it's just really scary to pay that price on Geloff. I hope he does well, so Oakland has something to cheer for and, becomes one of their next great guys. But no, not a top 150 pick. I cannot do it. Let's jump over to shortstop. We got some wildly disparate young shortstop prices here. And we couldn't do this without bringing up Elly De La Cruz. We just couldn't, with that obscene draft price that he has. I think that probably gives away how I feel about it, but he's up there at pick 23, CJ Abrams at pick 40, Oneil Cruz at pick 86, and then Anthony Volpe at 132. Only one pick ahead of Zach Geloff. That's hilarious to me. So you got those four guys there ranging from 23 to 132. So obviously cost plays a role here, right? A lot of these other tiers that we have, they're groups right by each other, but this one really takes it to another level here. Like, do you want to pay the premium for what maybe could be a 30-70 type guy, or somebody who spends 3 weeks in AAA if he keeps striking out at a 45% clip? But Joe, let's start with you here. These four are very interesting young guys. Who do you really go for, though, between De La Cruz, Abrams, Cruz, and Volpe?
all things considered, it's O'Neal Cruz. I think that he is still and the injury that I've heard him talked about is like he's an injury prone guy, whatever. It was a pretty fluky injury on a slide. I think that he's healthy now, and you're going to expect a pretty full season out of him. So I just want to address that, because I've heard a lot of people say, how can we expect a full season? There's a lot of injuries. It's not something that I think is going to carry over. It's kind of like the Aaron Judge stubbing his toe, breaking his toe thing. It's not something you can expect year after year. CJ Abrams and Ellie De La Cruz are two of the most overpriced players in my mind this year. There's a lot of uncertainty about Ellie in terms of what the production is going to be. And if he's actually, I don't think he's going to get sent down unless he's terrible. But the fact that that's even on the table for a second round pick is just a little ridiculous to me. CJ Abrams, he's not going to steal the same amount of bases that he did last year. I don't think. I think it's going to come down even a little bit. And that's what carried most of his value. Not a lot of counting stats. There's probably 15, 17 homers in the bat. But with O'Neal Cruz, you're looking at legitimate 25 potential. He showed us that even though it's kind of not a great lineup, a couple of years ago when he came up, 87 games, it was 45 runs and 54 ribbies. So he can be a self-sustaining force in that lineup, probably as a 250 hitter. And just to address Volpe, I just don't think he's that good. I really just don't think he's that good. And I don't want to be taking a guy on my team who I don't think is the greatest of players. He's going to be probably at the bottom of the order for the Yankees.
Why do you not think he's any good?
Not that I don't think he's any good, but just for a guy who's going to bat potentially below the Mendoza line, I don't know that 2020 is worth it at that point. And he's going to be better than that going forward.
It certainly wasn't last year when people were overpaying for him. I guess there's still, a pretty big price tag tied to it, but I'm wondering if there's some growth there, because I was not a big Volpe guy last year, but I look at this season and I'm like, is he really a 28% K rate guy? That part I don't know. And then a 259 BABIP, I think that could come up. So I'm left kind of intrigued by Volpe, especially at the price point. It's like, why would I pay for any of these three if he's coming there? But yeah, with the Cruzes, it's like, you cannot convince me to pay for Ellie when O'Neal is available 60 picks later. Between those two, there's just no universe where I'm taking Ellie when I can get O'Neal on the cheaper price point there. But I do like Volpe maybe a little bit more than you. You're just worried about the batting average specifically?
I think the batting average, like if you look at the projections, which they're not going to be perfect, but from anywhere from 224 to 234 projected in the minor leagues, he was, 280 to 300 kind of range. But I just don't know that he's going to sustain that. Like he's not going to sustain that. He's going to be like what do you think best case scenario is this year for him? 250, 240? Absolute best case, 100 percentile.
Absolute best cases, of course. I mean, you can't really. I think it could hit 290. I mean, in the absolute best case. Okay. Realistically, where would my projection be? It's probably going to be in the 250, 260. I don't really agree with the projections that have Volpe down in the 220s. Okay. I'm not really seeing that. That doesn't really make sense to me. But I'm also dumb, so who knows?
Smarter than I am, that's for sure.
Scott, what do you think here with these four? It's a really intriguing group. Any chance I can get you to take Ellie De La Cruz so we can make fun of you?
Not at 23.
Okay, yeah.
I love
not at 23.
I love Ellie De La Cruz.
Me too.
I've talked about it a lot.
Sorry, let me interrupt you. Let me be clear. I would love to be wrong and everyone can dunk in my face and say, he went 30-70, you stupid idiot. That'd be great because I would love watching it. But actually picking him in a draft at that price point is insane to me. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Scott.
Look, the top 25 hitters, like just hitters, it's insanely deep, right? Like we have this crop of hitting class, like these top 20, 30 guys, even deeper if you want. It's just wildly talented. So I'm not like Ellie De La Cruz might be one of the most talented of this bunch, right? Like in terms of like just hitters in baseball, not even this list. The problem is the risk you have to take on with the fact that he struggles not just with strikeouts and decision making. He really struggles with ground balls. He hits a lot of stuff on the ground. None of those skills matter. That like he's real fast, but you can't get you can't get an infield double. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do that. So once we start getting closer to like pick 35, maybe 40 even, like, yeah, sure, I'm in. Right. But 23, that's so, or even a 12 teamer where you can shoot for the moon in terms of upside, that's still really early. My pick out of this group is actually O'Neal Cruz as well. This guy, it's hard to forget in my mind, just watching the replay of like his 122 mile an hour line drive home run. Like this guy, superfluous talent. Look, he's not going to be able to steal 50, 60, 70 bases because he's 6'7", right? Like you just like, I can't even imagine like trying to like get down and steal like more than 20 bases when you're that huge. But I do think he can be a 20 stolen base guy. And a lot of projections like maybe are stopping at, So those little legs can do it, but O'Neal Cruz, much longer legs, harder
steal
for him.
bases.
But I love what I love about O'Neal Cruz is I think the power projections can go much higher. Projections have to like give you this sort of midpoint in terms of what the outcomes are. But O'Neal Cruz's power ceiling is like 30, 35. This dude can smash the ball, just needs to get it up in the air a little more. Like it's not even the fact that PNC Park is big. He's got power where dimensions don't really matter. It's about getting the ball up in the air and doing that. I think it's something he can do. We also saw him really start to attack his strikeout problem towards the end of 2022 and at the start of 2023. We didn't get much of a look at it yet, but he really started making better decisions at the plate. This guy's an extreme talent. And the only thing that really held him back in 2022 was management, right? The Pirates kept him down for like over half the season for no good reason. Dude played 130 games that year, which is about as many as if he could have with how long he was in the minors. So I think he's going to play. I really like him. I will say to Volpe's credit, he started making some better decisions. It's hard to work through these problems, right? Like when you're struggling as bad as he was in a market like he was in his very first year, sky high expectations. It's hard. Like I love that the team let him work it out in the major leagues and try to fix it with against major league pitchers. But like, that doesn't mean it happens faster. Right. Like,
that's a good point.
It's really difficult. So, I like that he's going later. I actually kind of like him at that price as well. Not as much as I like O'Neal Cruz at 86. And then with CJ Abrams, like if you told me he was going to lead off every single day, right? Then I love the stolen base projections. I think he has enough hit tool to give you a decent batting average too. I don't think he scores a lot of runs despite being a leadoff guy because he's in Washington. Obviously the RBI are going to be no good, but I have to know he's going to lead off. And he spent a lot of time, especially in the first half of the season last year, CJ Abrams hitting ninth. That's a problem. You can't hit ninth in Washington and have me care about you for my fantasy team, even if you steal 40 times, right? Like I can't do it. So
I certainly hope they commit to him in that leadoff spot there with Abrams. Little pushback on Abrams from the chat, Joe, with regards to, he's a former elite prospect. He was rushed to the majors. He's made some adjustments. Are you sure he's going to regress back to, what we saw before that 2023 second half? Care to respond to that?
Abrams?
Yes.
I mean, even when he was quote unquote breaking out in the second half, he was still below average in terms of WRC plus. It was just a one category thing essentially with the stolen bases where he was like
suck it, chat.
33 of 35. I don't hate him or anything. I just hate the price. That's what it comes down to with a lot of these players. It's like to the Ellie point. I want Ellie on a bunch of my teams. I'd take him on every team if he was going to pick 50, which as a side note, Yahoo and CBS are just opening up their draft rooms for the year, and you're kind of getting him in the 40s and 50s. So that's where you can kind of take him if you want him. But CJ Abrams in the third round, for me, I like to take pitching in the third round of a 15-teamer anyway, but CJ Abrams, even going over a guy like Bo Bichette in the same kind of range, I just can't do it. There's just, for me, no real need to take a guy in a terrible lineup who he did have a great second half, but it was one category essentially carrying the load there. The batting average was still 250-ish. It was like 11 home runs in the second half. It's a lot to ask for just stolen bases.
It's weird.
I think that's fair.
The extreme stolen base change that happens for him after the second or third month of the season. They just didn't have him running, and then all of a sudden let him steal double-digit bases in a month. It was wild.
It is wild, and it's difficult to ever project something like that too, especially in season. You're not expecting I don't begrudge anybody in virtually any format except maybe like an NL only, because what the heck were you really getting? I don't begrudge anybody who cut Abrams last year. I don't go around kicking myself if I cut him and I had to watch him pop off like that. He was carrying a sub 700 OPS into mid-July without the steals, like you guys are saying. So what the heck would have been the reason to really hang on to him? So that's not one of those where you kick yourself. Tristan Casas, somebody we already just talked about, and I think Justin brought up in his panel, there were indicators that he was going to get going. So cutting him was kind of a do it at your own risk type of deal. But Abrams, I understood why he was popping up on waiver wires. He just wasn't really showing anything. The last thing on Abrams, there is some talk in the chat as well from those same folks. Are they a bad lineup? PJ, yes. Until further notice, yes.
Absolutely.
They are still
awful.
a terrible lineup.
They're terrible.
don't necessarily, and listen, I was a year early on Lane Thomas. I liked him in 2022, and so I took that one on the chin, and then he popped off last year when I barely had him on any teams. Thank you for that. Ruiz isn't bad, but then you got Meneses, Gallo, Stone Garrett. What is he? Luis Garcia, Nick Senzel, Victor Robles. So PJ, I think the burden of proof would be on you there to kind of let us know why you think it's any good at all besides Abrams and a couple others. I think they got a couple intriguing pieces, but that's it. Last thing on this one, and I'm stretching out on shortstop here because we do have time to kind of stretch our legs here. With O'Neal Cruz, guarantee that first spring homer. You know, we talk about this concept a lot. Once a player starts going in spring, price is going to go up. Where's your breaking point on him? I don't know that he's going to get all the way up to Ellie. I think the team context and lack of doing anything last year will keep him from pushing all the way up to that degree. But Joe, let me start with you on this one. He's at 87 right now. Where does it stop for you? Pick 86 right now. Where does it stop for you on O'Neal Cruz to where then he's in that Abrams, Ellie range of paying too high? You paying pick 50 for him? Where's that breaking point?
I think that's probably roughly the point, like 50, 60. I'm just pulling up the ADP myself here just to see who I would want to take him over. So like the 63-ish kind of range, like Nico Horner, Matt McLean. I think I would take him over those guys. I think I would.
What if he fits in that gap there? Abrams is at 40, and then those other two guys are at 63. They both have a 63 ADP. What if he fits in the middle there somewhere? Would you like him as the 9th guy, O'Neal Cruz, then, if he's in the middle of those groups?
Yeah, I think I would still take him there. I think I would take him as high, honestly, as about 50. Yeah, just looking at ADP over the last month, I'd take him over Royce Lewis. I think it's very close, but I think I would take him over Royce Lewis.
I love Royce, but I'm not necessarily sure I disagree. I just love Royce. Scott, what about you? What price point do you start to jump off of the O'Neal Cruz train?
So it was right at pick 50, and actually Royce Lewis was the first name I saw because we're talking about another guy with supreme talent, but in his case, like a huge injury risk.
Massive injury history.
And, you know, again, I talked about this in my rolling charts thing, but like every chart on Royce Lewis pointed up really fast and really far, right? Like he ended up being good at basically everything he was trying to do. So I really like Royce Lewis. I think O'Neal Cruz, like though, in terms of like raw talent, you're right in that range. Like I'm willing to spend pick 50 on him. Maybe like, you know, I could get up to, you know, because of where I am in the draft. Maybe after pick like 40, there's a lot of pitchers in that range that you really want to start looking at. I could see in spring, like you're saying, the first home run. We're going to have more StatCast data. You know that Twitter is going to, the website formerly known as Twitter, is going to explode when he hits that 118 mile an hour home run, and he's going to do it. And I could see him like almost replacing CJ Abrams around pick 40. And that's a tough decision to make, but I could see myself doing it if I've made some really safe picks up into that point, especially in like the 12-team context where the replacement value isn't going to kill me.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because, and I wanted to check with that because I do believe O'Neal Cruz has a chance to be one of those big spring risers. And so if you really love him, like you guys seem to, get your fall winter shares. That way you've got some in there in case he shoots up into like the Ellie De La Cruz craziness, which again, I don't think he'll get quite that high, but I do think pick 40, pick 50 is definitely somewhere where we could see O'Neal Cruz going in mid to late March. Let's move over to the hot corner. Let's we talked 4 young players here. Let's jump into a little bit of the elder statesman. You know, the one of these guys isn't that old, but he's been around for a while. He's firmly a veteran. You got Nolan Arenado and Alex Bregman going right next to each other. Pick 105 and 106 respectively, or 104 and 105 respectively there with Arenado and Bregman. Couple of hot corners, steady, right? And I know that things fell off a little bit last year for Arenado, so people are pushing him down, which I like. Finally, a discount that I can get behind here. I think it's probably too big of a discount. I still really like Nolan Arenado, but I love Bregman too, so I'm really torn between these two. Let's start with Scott. With the elder statesman, what do you think of Arenado v. Bregman, both on quality teams or in quality lineups? We know the Cardinals sucked last year. I don't think they're going to suck 2 years in a row. I don't even know the last time they did that. So I actually do feel comfortable saying 2 good teams, but even if you balk at that, I don't think you can disagree that it's at least 2 good lineups. So what do you think between Bregman and Arenado?
Yeah, so I'm leaning Arenado. one, a lot of projections are, expecting him to bounce back. I kind of like digging around, and sometimes like the shallow types of splits still tell me something I want to know. I was just looking at monthly, like his monthly splits, right? Which
Mhm.
again, months are arbitrary endpoints, but
Sure.
like he was terrible in September and he was really not very good in April, but he was basically regular Arenado besides that, right?
Bad bookends and then a good meaty middle.
Yeah. And so it's not like the talent just wasn't there. It wasn't like some steady decline where we see the skills fade away. Like he had 2 bad months, right? And like one of them was like a normal kind of bad month, and the other one, like September, was putrid.
And it
He
was
only had-
74 plate appearances in September too. So it was a small sample, kind of like the Sean Murphy thing, where it's like, how much are you even going to put in 74 plate appearances?
Yeah. And so with Arenado, one, I agree. I don't think the Cardinals are nearly as bad as they were last year. I was surprised they didn't do some kind of Cardinal magic and win like 40 games in a row at the end of the season, because it just felt like that was what was going to happen, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
But I think Arenado can bounce back. Like this was the first time since God, what year? Like since I was still caring about school, since Arenado didn't have 100 RBI, right? So yeah, 2014, not counting 2020. That was the last time he didn't have 100 RBI.
That's
right?
nuts.
It's like he could very well get back there. It was like now the new quote is like he's had at least 93 RBI in every season.
Because he was only 7 short. Like that's the beauty of it too. You look at this season, 266, 26, 93. That didn't kill you. Anybody that's saying, "Oh, I drafted Arenado, that's why I lost last year." No, it isn't. You had many other sucky players. He fell short of expectations, but he didn't come anywhere close to killing a ball club. So I agree there.
That's what we talk about with floor. That's what floor
exactly.
means. He has the bad
Exactly.
season, and that's what you get. Like I love that.
Yep. And that's why I'll go back to the well again. 33, we're getting into the mid 30s, but that's not old. I feel comfortable that he can rebound, even if it's not all the way back to 290, 3,100, which he did in 2022. I think he'll be better in 2023, particularly with the batting average. Give me something like 280, 28, and 100, which is right there on 330, 100. Joe, between Bregman and Arenado, who do you like?
I've gone back and forth all of draft season on these two guys. I did an ADP battle on my own show a few weeks ago with Frank Stanfill and our buddy the Welsh, and I picked Arenado at that point. Now I'm thinking I'm leaning slightly towards Bregman, while also saying it's pretty much a coin toss.
Totally agree that it's coin toss.
I don't really have a huge difference here between them, but I think it does come down to the runs to some extent for Arenado. The last 2 seasons, 71 and 73. You want to go back a year prior, 81. Not great, not terrible, but not great, where Bregman is pretty safe in the 90 to 100 run and RBI range every full year of his career. Everything else is pretty much on par. Everything else is pretty much a wash. But I think that Bregman is probably a little more secure in the run area. I think there's just a better lineup around him, while also acknowledging, to your point, St. Louis's lineup last year was not bad. Their struggles were mostly the pitching side of things. When Miles Michaelis is your ace, that's where the problems are going to come from. Arenado was still very good. Goldschmidt, it was not amazing, but still, not bad. Contreras and Gorman, and there's so many great pieces in that lineup still. So to anybody, trying to tout that the Cardinals suck or whatever, it's not true. It's really not true. The pitching probably sucks. Their lineup does not. But that being said, I think it's Bregman by a hair. But if I was drafting 10 teams, it would probably be 5-5 at this point, or maybe 6-4 to Bregman. It's very close for me.
It's exactly where I'm at with the slight lean toward Bregman. I'm a big fan of his. I love that you called out runs. Runs are a very important category that do get short shrift on the fantasy landscape. I think it's a little bit like whip sometimes on the pitching side, gets a little bit overlooked, and you can really, really make hay by getting guys that can give you 100+ runs after pick 100. And there aren't going to be too many guys like that. Bregman is definitely one of them. And so that's where I lean, but it is really a coin flip, and you give me 10 drafts, I'm coming out with dang near equal shares of both. Any thoughts on Bregman, Scott, before we jump on? You picked Arenado, but I doubt you're totally off Bregman. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, and in fact, I think there's a lot of team builds by the time you get there where Bregman makes a lot more sense, because one, the runs, right? Like again, it is hard to find runs on the waiver wire because you need guys hitting in the top of the order. You can find RBI, like by hook or by crook. You can find some guy who hits 6th for a decent offense, or someone who bats like 8th for Atlanta and still get RBI. Right. Yep. But you can't get runs, not even in Atlanta. You can't score that many runs down there. So that is a big deal. And it ends up making a 20 run plus RBI advantage to Bregman, because you know he's going to get the runs and he's going to also get RBI, hitting second there right behind Jose Altuve. So but again, like the ceiling isn't quite the same because like Bregman ain't getting to 30 home runs. Like 25 is probably more than what he had last year is probably more than what he'll get projected for going forward, because he just hasn't shown us that kind of power since, the seasons, without going too much into that. But with Bregman, that's really the thought, right? It's like the range of outcomes for Alex Bregman, as I talked about in one of the earlier spots, was it's just really tight. Like his floor and ceiling are right next to each other, and we pretty much know what they are. Whereas with Arenado, there's like, I guess, a little more wishy-washiness. We're like, well, he could get back to close to 30 home runs and have that high average. I think that's very much on the table. But, like there is this downside, which isn't bad, but it's what we saw last year. Whereas with, Bregman, it's like, no, we know exactly what we're getting.
Yep.
It's basically what we saw in 2020, 2022, 2023. Like that's just what he is.
And he did say, this is the classic best shape of his life, but he did say he's feeling better than ever. He mentioned last year that he had taken a step forward. He had been feeling better than the previous year, but this year already he's saying he feels the best he's felt since he was younger, back in his mid 20s and 18, 19. And that was rabbit ball when the 41 homers came. So you're not projecting that. Like you said, you are putting a mid to high 20s tag on Bregman. You could maybe get 30 if the pull field really treats him well, especially at home, but you just plan for the 25 with the 90 plus ribs and the 100 plus runs, and then just have a field day with him for sure. And Lamar Jackson just threw a crucial pick, and I think the Chiefs are going to hang on here. Not that we care about football. Actually, Scott and I absolutely do. All right, we have outfield here, and we got plenty of time here, so we're doing well. We got old guard versus new wave, and I put these guys into two different groups, but honestly, it's just you can pick any of the four. I just wanted to break them up because they're kind of interesting, with Jazz Chisholm Jr. at 74 and Mike Trout at 77. So you got the young and old, and then a little bit later you got young and old again with Josh Lowe at pick 80, Christian Yelich at pick 83. So Joe, let's start with you here. Again, you can pick any of the four. At some point, I'm going to make you pick between each little grouping, but for now, just pick your favorite of the four there, since they only range from 74 to 83.
Man, I was going to cheat your answer, but I'm not going to cheat the question. I'll go with Christian Yelich. I think that he's the safest of the bunch. I think in terms of games played, in terms of the well-roundedness of what he does from a fantasy point of view, good batting average, you're getting probably 20-20 or so, decent lineup. He plays, he's on the field very regularly, which you can't say that about Chisholm. Not sure we can say that about Trout. Josh Lowe also has, the weird Tampa, platooning stuff probably that's going to, be maybe not a huge factor, but some factor at pick 80. Considering Yelich, not even, the fact that he's the cheapest also just kind of adds on to it, but I think he's also the safest there. So if I had to pick one, I would pick Yelich.
I love Yelich. So, I have a hard time with this group just because I'm kind of interested in the whole group in some ways, getting Mike Trout at pick 74. Who would have thought that was going to happen? Obviously, at some point, it's going to happen because Father Time is undefeated. But, man, it just feels weird seeing him here. Scott, your favorite of the four before we break them up into the two groups.
So, I'm going to try, I want to pick Christian Yelich because, first of all, he actually has two fairly healthy seasons in a row. And the thing about being an injury risk is you aren't until you are, and you are until you aren't, right?
Exactly.
We don't actually have some way to actually project what potential injuries are. We just call you an injury risk because you've missed a bunch of time, and we stop calling you that because you're not missing time anymore, right? To go back to football, that was Matt Stafford, right? He started missing time, and then all of a sudden he was an absolute stud, never missed time, right? It was, you just are until you aren't, or you aren't until you are. So I want to pick Yelich. I'm actually going to go with Josh Lowe in shallower leagues, right? So in these 12 teamers, I'm going to go Josh Lowe, and it's because I'm sort of, I'm drunk on Detroit sports, and I'm drunk on Josh Lowe's rolling charts against lefties. He got so much better at making decisions and making contact against left-handed pitching. And I mean, look, I know it's Tampa Bay. I know there's a lot of risk to have him shoved on the bench. And that's why in a 15 team, 5 outfield situation, give me Yelich every time, because I know a lot more of what I'm going to get. I'm not going to get a part-time player. And I know I'm going to get a guy that hits near the top of the lineup. Josh Lowe, look, when he was good, they were willing to let him play almost every day, right? And we know that Tampa Bay will let guys play every day, right? They did it with Isaac Paredes last year, and he can't even play defense.
Yeah.
Right? They will do it if they think you're that important to their lineup. I think Josh Lowe,
oh, sorry. I thought you were done. No, you go. You keep going.
So Josh Lowe can be that. It's just about making the right decisions against lefties. Look, he doesn't need to hit home runs against them. He doesn't really need to do that much except not strike out like 35% of the time. And he needs to slap a couple singles here and there. That's all he needs to be good enough to play against lefties. So I think Josh Lowe, in terms of ceiling compared to like Christian Yelich, I think the ceiling on Josh Lowe is higher. I don't want to say the ceiling is higher than a Jazz Chisholm or a Mike Trout, but the only reason I think Lowe misses half the season is because they decide to start platooning him. And even then he gets to like 100, probably 120, 130 games. It's not because like his legs fell off.
He's another guy, Josh Lowe, and I was talking about this concept with Torque, where a bad run threw him off the fantasy radar when people couldn't stop getting him. You know, they were paying like $500 for fab pickups on him, and then complete afterthought because he had 198 bad plate appearances in 2022. It's just like, I don't know how we keep making these mistakes in the fantasy world, like how disparate these prices get. Ellie will be the next guy. If he does fail a bit this year, and maybe not even talking demotion or anything, but he just kind of meanders through the season. It's 240 with like 22-30 and decent run ribby numbers, 210 average even, right? Like bottom it out a bit. His price will sink. It will absolutely sink because people are like, oh, that guy sucks now. It's like we make such wild reactions as a fantasy community. It's crazy where Josh Lowe was, and now he's a top 100 pick again. Now, if we go double youngster versus double oldie, obviously you took Yelich. Both of y'all took Yelich, so we know that's Yelich over Trout. I imagine it's Lowe over Jazz for Scott. Joe, what about you between the two youngsters only, Jazz v. Josh?
I think it's Jazz. It's close. I took him the other day for the first time this year, and it was in a 12-teamer. It was an NFBC 50. In a 15-teamer where I want a little bit more security, I don't know that I would take anybody here, to be honest, but in those shallower formats, especially a 12-team league, I think that Jazz Chisholm is the guy. And I know most people do play in 12-team leagues as opposed to us with a lot of 15-teamers. If you just look at what Jazz did over the last 2 seasons combined, it's about 160 games. I know you can't really do this. It's just whatever. But 33 homers and 34 stolen bases over the last 160 games. I'm just dreaming.
I see the value in doing that, by the way, though. Like just saying, if you're trying to find an upside, here is an actual stat instead of, at least you're not just extrapolating. You are taking the 2 seasons and they do smash together as a full season for Jazz, right? You're not saying that that's exactly what he's going to do, but it gives you an idea.
I'm kind of dreaming on it, Paul. I'm dreaming on 130. If he gives you 130 games, then you're probably looking at 25 and 30 with a 250 or so batting average, in which case he's absolutely destroyed, the 85 or wherever he ends up going, 75, 85 range of ADP. Where is he right now? 74. But he will, I think, destroy that if he's able to stay healthy. And of course, projecting health is a problem. I have no idea if this is going to be the year where he's actually able to do it. But I think that if that's the only risk for him, I think I would lean slightly his way over Lowe, where there are also different concerns. I can understand both sides of it. I can absolutely understand going for Josh Lowe, but I think for me personally, the gut says Jazz Chisholm.
It's a really fun group of 4 guys for me. We haven't really talked much about the GOAT, Mr. Fishboy, Mike Trout. So let's do that a little bit as we're wrapping up here. Again, it is funny to see him at pick 74 because how much he used to run the fantasy landscape. You talk about injuries. That's the name of the game here with Trout. He hasn't played over 120 games since 2019, 82 last year. Still a god whenever he plays. Even last year being a quote-unquote down year in terms of his rates, he was a 134 WRC plus. Like that's just how bananas he is. Great power. He doesn't bring the speed of any of these guys. Like Yelich is the lowest of the group, but it's like nothing for Trout anymore because that's a self-preservation thing. Totally get it. But Scott, let me start with you on Trout. Is there any build where you're getting to Trout?
Yeah, actually. And it's one where this is easy to do really in 5 or 3 outfield formats. And it's where you had, 1 or 2 elite outfilders right off the top, right? That's how you swallow that risk. You say, how do I get 2 top 15 outfielders or how do I get 3 top 20 outfielders on my team? Well, I drafted 2 towards the top because the top of outfield is so deep. But after that, it's like, I took Mike Trout and he stayed healthy, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially in these 3 outfield leagues, which is basically the standard now for like default leagues across everywhere. I know most expert formats don't do that, but like a 3 outfield league, Mike Trout, like every time, because the placement level is so high. I can fill in, even if he misses half the season, I can fill them in with like good players, right? So like, that's how I get there. It's knowing I'm going to have a deep outfield already because I picked too early, which is very easy to do in a lot of ways. Or it's because I'm in a shallower format, like 12 team, 3 outfield, heck, even 15 team, 3 outfield. I'll do it, right? Because I can replace an outfield, and Mike Trout, like those 80 games are still like a whole player of production anyway.
I know. That's the craziest part about him, is that he still put up so much production in those 82 games there for Mike Trout. And it still wouldn't necessarily surprise anybody if he does spike another 145 at some point. He is only 32, right? The injuries are piling up. But like Joe said, predicting injury is so difficult. You're injured till you're not, as Scott was saying. And so if he dropped a $145 on us, what a gem to get Mike Trout after pick 70 for that. Joe, with your thoughts on Mike Trout, do you share similarity with Scott where, hey, in a shallower league where replacement level is higher, I can take that shot because if I do get a $130, it's golden, let alone 145, or too old, too many injuries, can't do it? Where do you come out on Trout?
Yeah, I drafted him once, and he fell to like this. I think it was the 7th round or something obscene, 6th, 7th round. It just, I think that's part of it. You see him sitting there for so long, and it comes to a point where your brain just doesn't compute it anymore. Why is Mike Trout sitting here at pick 80? So I'll take him if he is still sitting in like the 70 to 80 range once or twice, maybe. But we also have to look at the fact that this is probably going to be the worst lineup around him in his entire career. There's no Pujols, there's no Hamilton, there's no Rendon, whatever he was. There's no Ohtani. There's no Jared Walsh. There's no nothing around him. Nobody really. Brandon Drury, Luis Rengifo. What are we talking about here? There's not a lot there.
I like Taylor Ward, but he can't really stay healthy either, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really a diminished supporting cast.
It's tight. It's tough. Yeah.
And if you also look at just, the batting average has gone down a little bit these last couple of years. He's no longer a secure 300. He's projected to hit 260, and that's what he hit last year. It was 280 the year prior. The strikeouts have become more of a problem the last 3 years, always being a 20% guy, going up to 27, 28%. No speed. Like, there are a lot of worries, and the problem with a guy like Trout is that these generational players, you never know how they are going to look. The progressions for these generational players do not look the same as they do for the average player or even an all-star player. So Trout could very easily next year hit 40 home runs, drive in 100, score 100, hit 310. And I don't think any of us would be terribly shocked by it. But I don't think I would be that shocked either if he plays a whole season and it's only 24 homers. He bats 260. There's only 80 runs and 80 RBIs. I think the worry for me is outweighing the potential good in that lineup to the point where I would take him once or twice, but he's not going to be somebody, despite the depressed price, that becomes a mainstay on my teams because of it.
Yeah. And, being a multi-leaguer, as the three of us are, we can, kind of build portfolios, right? Where we can expand and get little pieces of everybody. If you only play 1-2 leagues, you got to be a little bit tighter on those decisions and where you want to take those risk profiles. So that's totally something to consider as well. I know Miles is going to be coming lurking here at any moment, but I got a couple questions from the chat that I want to run by y'all. So just quick hitters. Scott, start with you. Randy Arozarena versus Nolan Jones. Who do you like better in 5x5? I'm
going to take the devil I know, and that's Randy Arozarena.
I love Randy. Joe, you're nodding. You're with Randy as well?
Yeah, I'm out on Jones.
Like, I want him to be great, but it's the 410 BABIP. We all know that's coming down. But how bad will the strikeouts affect him, even in Colorado? Colorado can only cover so much. So I do have some nerves about Jones with his price point shooting up. And Randy Arozarena is just strong. He's just really good. Very interesting question here, Scott. Evan Carter for $5 or Yelly for $20 in a league that requires left field specific.
Yuck, man, those are so tough. I don't have the left field pool memorized.
Me neither. But if you remember the top 10 MLB show, left field is light this year. Let's just say that
it is. I still probably got to go Evan Carter. You've got risk on both sides with
sure.
You've got maybe some injury risk. That's a lot of money to get back in a league where you have to think a lot more about so many different positions, having like a top and a bottom, right? Like all those cliffs. I probably want that money back and take Evan Carter, who I think is still going to be good. I don't think he can hit like that many home runs or have that pace he had this year, but he can still be a 20 home run guy. plenty of steals. He probably put up similar numbers to Yelich with obviously $15 back for the auction.
Yeah, I adore Evan Carter. Totally agree. There, I think I probably do take the discount. What about you, Joe? Between those two?
I mean, it doesn't really matter, but did he specify how many teams or anything like that?
He did not.
No?
He did not. So I do not know what kind of teamage we're working with there. Just that they're $5 and $20 respectively.
Just based on that, I think you have to go Carter. I think you have to go Carter, right? You save the $15, like Scott said. The production is going to be, the difference is going to be negligible probably between the two of them. There's maybe some concern.
You just put it in the chat. Yep.
There's some concern maybe about how playing time is going to shake out, especially if Langford is up.
Sure.
But I think it's still probably Carter for me.
Yeah, I think his skills are so strong that he could age or he could develop pretty quickly relative to his age. Going to be age 21 next year, and he just has such a strong eye. I don't think the 32% K rate that we saw in 75 plate appearances last year is anywhere near where Evan Carter's going to be. I think he's somebody that could be honestly relatively close to a 1-to-1 strikeout to walk. He can walk so much. Nick,
I'm out on Evan Carter. Hi guys.
why is that? I'm surprised you even know who that is.
You probably know because it was like decision value was really bad, or contactability, or maybe it was contactability was really bad. Something
guaranteed nothing about his decisions was bad. He's one of the
it must not be
sharpest
decision
guys.
Making. It's got to be contactability. That was just really low and startling for me.
I don't know, man. 75 plate appearances is probably too tough
possible.
to make too many
very,
determinations there. I really like him.
But I mean, 5 versus 20, then fine. But I think that. Oh, was he top 100 right now?
Let me check that, because at that price point, I think that is fair. So I know we're wrapping up.
Who cares what I think, though? Doesn't matter. This was a hitting panel. We got to move on. Unfortunately, I'm just
pick 140.
taking the bait.
I think that's a totally fair price.
Well, then that's totally fair.